I think that critics and journalists, they get this sort of stereotype that they're sitting around only watching The Godfather and like these very prestigious films. I'm sure some of them are, but that's definitely not me. The reason I label myself with questionable taste is because I like bad movies. I love 80s schlock. I love Alligator. I love Slugs. If somebody like is like, oh, this movie is terrible, I'm like, oh, well, what is it? And then I go and watch it. Those sort of like B movies that really lean into their low budgets and they kind of like know what they are and they're not trying to be anything else. I love them. I live there. It's comfortable. It's great. My name is Jeanette White. I am a entertainment journalist, movie podcaster, and a horror author. My love for horror started with books, honestly. Those dreaded summer reading lists that you'd have to do in like middle school, I hated those. And so one day my mom, up in arms, was like, you know what, we're going to the library. You can pick whatever you want, just anything, just as long as you read something, because I hated reading. And so I found Goosebumps, of course, and like any good 90s kid, and grabbed it, was enticed by the cover, brought it home, loved it. And so that kind of kick-started this fascination with horror. I was into it before, obviously. Are You Afraid of the Dark was a big deal then as well. Every time I'd go to the library, I'd leave with like the max limit you could have in Goosebumps. And then I kind of went to Animorphs, which is sci-fi horror adjacent. Went to Stephen King and then kind of branched out, to people like Bentley Little, Jack Ketchum, Shirley Jackson, a lot of the classic horror authors. And as I got more into books, I just got more into movies. I wanted to go back and watch the Stephen King movies that I was reading. I wanted to go back and see the classic monster movies. I wanted to go back and build a foundation of horror. I think horror of all the genres is so important to have background knowledge of, because it's very by nature almost like incestuous and inspired. Everything connects. Psycho inspired Halloween, and Halloween inspired Friday, and Friday inspired whatever, Slumber Party Massacre, and it goes on and on and on. And so I think if you really want to be a good horror fan and catch all the references and all the homages, you've got to start with the basics. And so that just kind of developed into an obsession and where I am today. And all I really remember that too is the pod where they, lean over the pod and have the things swim up their ears. That was very scary because it's a big part of the book, right? But to see it on TV, I guess I was like, whoa, this is scary. It really stuck with me. I'm also a huge X-Files fan, and he is doing X-Files too. Yes, then Animorphs, and I'm like, what's happening? Ryan Coogler is like my savior. I think he's really bringing back a lot of that millennial nostalgia stuff. So I'm very excited to see what he does with X-Files, and also very excited for Animorphs. So by day, I'm an entertainment journalist, and technically I am by night as well. It's kind of one of those jobs that you're always doing, because even when you're just relaxing at home, watching TV and watching movies, it's, you're storing that information to use for work later. I've written at a lot of places. CBR, JustWatch is where I am now. I've done the Mary Sue, Fangirlish, Den of the Geek, Dread Central, but yeah, I'm kind of all over the place, and it's a fun role. I like to do as much horror content as I can, obviously, but unfortunately my job requires me to be a bit more well-rounded. I do specialize in like nerdum stuff as a whole. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I also cover Drag Race, RuPaul's Drag Race. It's something I'm actively covering now. It's a great gig. I like being a critic. I like digging into those rabbit holes that we kind of all go down, but I get to write them down and analyze and do that kind of thing. It's been a long time with The Walking Dead. Kind of wherever I go, I become the Walking Dead expert. Yeah, I've been covering The Walking Dead for 7 years now, including all the spin-offs, Fear the Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, and, they go on and on. But I do love The Walking Dead. I think The Walking Dead it's a really special show. It came out, I think, on the right time on TV. Obviously, it's a comic book. Just talking about the show, I think it was what we needed. And it's so interesting to me too, because The Walking Dead, it is a horror series, but it's a horror series that got a lot of mainstream attention because the character development and the writing was so good, and is so good. Greg Nicotero's special effects are absolutely amazing. I stand by it. I think he's got some of the best looking zombies since George Romero, and honestly maybe even better than that. I think he does a really good job making them scary and realistic to a point. I think the beginning is the best. I loved, spoiler alert, Glenn dies, and it was a huge deal. And that episode is one of the best episodes of television ever made, in my opinion, because it made like 5 million people stop watching that show. So that's how you know you made good TV, even though it was really sad. Yeah, I really loved the pre-Glenn death era, but there's some really good stuff that comes later. I will say season 10, they bring in a villain named Alpha, and she is, in my opinion, the best villain in all of the Walking Dead franchise. Especially season 10 really made me fall in love with, re-fall in love, I should say, with Carol and Daryl. My ultimate favorite duo. I write about them all the time. The fandom yells at me all the time. I don't care, but I absolutely adore them. I think they're great. I've had the opportunity to interview a lot of the Walking Dead cast, including Norman Reedus and Melissa McBride and Lenny James. And, you know, they're all very great and they're very passionate about the franchise. So it's just lovely to talk to people that seem to be, you know, still in love with the work that they do. Because I'm an entertainment journalist and I don't always get to talk about the things I want to talk about, I decided I had more thoughts and opinions specifically about movies. I love movies. I love TV too, but TV is much more of a commitment. In movies, you get great, wonderful stories in such a short amount of time. So long story short, I decided to take some of my extra thoughts and put it into a podcast, which I host and manage. It is called This or That Movies. And essentially the shtick is I'm taking two movies that are similar, stuff like Critters and Gremlins it's kind of constantly compared because of that similar idea or story. I invite on other entertainment journalist friends and we essentially decide which of these movies is better in our opinions. I usually start it off by going through some data and we'll pick which movie is more popular according to audiences. So that's kind of fun to see like what the audience opinion is versus where we come down on things, because sometimes even the most, you know, acclaimed movie with the biggest box office budget, it's not your favorite, you know. It's sometimes that underdog movie that really has your heart. So it's really fun to sit down and talk to friends that are in the industry and just express our opinions. I'm going to say I prefer Critters, which I didn't think I would say. I actually watched Critters for the first time recently, like within the last couple of years, and I had such a great time with it. One, I love Dee Wallace. I think she's amazing. There was just something about Critters that was just, it was fun, and I really dug the perspective of that movie. The little boy in that, who's actually the voice of Steve from American Dad, if that means anything to anyone. I just really like that story. To me, it was almost like a story about a boy being forced to be a man. Critters is silly and dumb, but it had more depth than I expected it to have. And it was a nice, crisp watch. It didn't overstay its welcome. It was done when you wanted it to be done. But it's funny because when I finished it, I was like, oh, Gremlins is better. Like, this was great, but Gremlins is better. And then I rewatched Gremlins again during the holiday season, and I got to the end of it, and I was like, you know what? I think I like Critters more. I don't know. It just has stuck with me. So that's kind of my long, complicated story about Critters and why I know it's controversial, but I think it's better than Gremlins. My podcast is still in the early days, so I hope that it continues to gain traction, because the whole premise of my podcast is having like constructive, friendly conversations about potential disagreements, because you're, you know, putting two movies against each other and it organically can create kind of conflict. I always think it's really fun to just talk to different types of people and get their takes on movies and opinions, and to just be able to have a platform where people can express their thoughts without judgment. I would like to see more of that in the world, people being kinder to each other, and that's something that I hope that this podcast can do. And I really appreciate all the people that have listened and who have been sending me meaningful comments and being like, hey, I disagree with you on this, but you made a really good point. Or like, hey, this is what I think. Like, what do you think? Like, I really appreciate those people, and I hope to meet more of them. I think that critics and journalists, they get this sort of stereotype that they're sitting around only watching The Godfather and like these very prestigious films. I'm sure some of them are, but that's definitely not me. So the reason I label myself with questionable taste is because I like bad movies. I love 80s schlock. I love Alligator. I love Slugs. If somebody like is like, oh, this movie is terrible, I'm like, oh, well, what is it? And then I go and watch it. To me, that's a selling point. It's not a bad thing. Although sometimes there are movies that are just genuinely terrible and those can be time sucks. But those sort of like B movies that really lean into their low budgets and they kind of like know what they are and they're not trying to be anything else, I love them. I live there. It's comfortable. It's great. Great. I love those 70s like natural horror movies and some of the ones in the 80s as well. But I don't know what was in the water in the 70s, but they love that type of movie like Grizzly and Squirm. And I thought Frogs was great. I can't stop thinking about it. The grandfather who shoots the rattlesnake point blank while it's like dangling above the dinner table. And then he's like, all right, let's eat now, as if it's normal. Like that movie is so unhinged, but the setting is beautiful. I love that most of the footage is just stock footage of like frogs chirping. We barely even get to see any action. It's like fade to black, but like it's great. I loved it. I love every second of it. Alligator is definitely my top. I love Alligator. I rewatch it all the time. Alligator does have the greatest wedding scene. The image of the little boy walking the plank into that open mouth of the alligator in the pool. I think any kid has probably been afraid of that could be a reality. So yeah, that movie's fun. I love it. I show it to anybody. It's like the #1 movie. If someone's like, oh, I want to watch, something, or I have like a party, I put on Alligator. Here you go. I'm the author of 2 books. I would classify them as dark thrillers with horror elements. It's funny because when I first sat down to write them, I was like, I'm going to make like a true horror movie, full Stephen King mode. And then I wrote my first book and it was much more of like a dark domestic thriller. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to try it again with my second book. And then I kind of did the same thing. So that just seems to be kind of where I feel at home, is kind of like in between of psychological horror and like true horror. But Shattered is a domestic thriller. It's about a middle-aged woman whose husband, she catches her husband having an affair, and she proceeds to start seeing this dark figure in mirrors. And as she's dealing with this, she is like unraveling these secrets about her husband. So there's a little bit of mystery, a little bit of twist, definitely a psychological element to it. And my second book, The Other Inside, is about like vampires. I can't say too much because there is some twists and reveals, but it's made clear right away that our main POV character, Billy, is I'm gonna say vampires in parentheses. He's a killer. He kills people. His mother was murdered when he was a child, and his stepfather was put away for the crime, but Billy starts to question whether his stepfather actually did that, or maybe it was him. Again, more of like a psychological horror thing with some twists and reveals on the end. I like both my books, but I'm much more proud, I guess, of The Other Inside. I really like the ending, and I really like the characters in those books. It's actually something I've thought about going back and doing maybe like a second edition or some kind of continuation of them, because I really do love Billy specifically. I did start a third novel. I'm about like 30,000 words into it, which is a pretty good chunk. I couldn't find a way to get where I needed to be. The way I write is I write probably how you shouldn't write, which is I like to write by scene. So I'll get scene ideas and I'll kind of have all these scenes, and then it becomes like a Frankenstein project of stitching them together. And so that's kind of what happened with this book. I know the end, I have the beginning, I have the middle, but the stitching in between is lost. I've also done some short stories for various publications, including Scare Street. So that's been kind of a way. I haven't done anything recently, but that's been a way of kind of writing some ideas down without having to commit to the length of a novel. In the meantime, I try to tell myself that, it's okay, because that's like what Mary Shelley did, from my understanding. She kind of would do that, and she started her story with the bringing to life of the monster and then kind of jumped around. And so I'm like, you know what? If she did it and that turned out, like, it's fine. I could do that. We can do that. kids especially should be reading more books and watching like movie and TV as well. I do think movie and TV gets a bad rap, but I think in moderation, it's an excellent storytelling tool. And a lot of it comes from books. I think it's so important because living in fiction lets you experience different perspectives, allows you to be more empathetic. It allows you to learn very serious consequences without having to experience them yourselves. I think that's something that the world needs more of. My psych degree that I have was a big motivator to write both of my books. I use that a lot in my writing, but I think it's always fun to like watch a movie and analyze the characters' motivations and the villains and why people do what. I also think horror in general is very interesting. The psychology of the genre itself, the things that come in vogue when they come in vogue, as we were talking about with like frogs and that uprising of like natural horror films. Yeah, some of them are Jaws knockoffs, but I think, you know, in the 70s, Woodstock and, you know, them coming out of the hippie movement and sort of this like concern for the environment that was going on. You see that. You see the slashers in the 80s when there's the big serial killer boom. Obviously, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, you get a lot of those monster kaiju movies as sort of like a response to nuclear fear. We were in the Contagion phase and the zombie phase more recently. And so I think stuff like that is really, really interesting. So yeah, I think in that sense, psychology of it is fun. I would assume that's kind of why most people are attracted to horror in some sense. The real world is scary, right? Horror is such a unique way that we can talk about real problems, but with like a metaphorical lens. And you can do it fun, like The Blob, or you can do it really scary, like, I don't know, something like The Babadook that definitely leans into more grounded and gritty. But for me, that's so much more digestible, I guess, to consume the fears through horror with a layer in between. So interesting too, because I think certain types of audiences, they look down on horror and they see it as this like less than genre. And that just always makes me laugh because I think horror, even in some of its like stupidest forms, it has so much to say. And I think the people that say things like that horror is just torture porn and this, they probably had one bad experience with one movie that wasn't for them, which I totally get. I love horror, but not all horror is for me. But I always wish people would give it a chance and kind of find the genre that works for them, because I personally think horror has more to say than most other genres out there. And it's such a shame people are missing such good stories. It is barbaric a lot. I have, you know, friends, and I have like my cousin is always like she's like terrified of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and she'll always be like, "You're so weird for liking this," or because I'll always say that movie's so beautiful. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like one of the most beautiful movies ever made, and some of the cinematography in that movie is just like gorgeous, and some of that great cinematography happens during really brutal scenes. So it is like a complicated thing to explain to somebody. I think there's some kind of fascination with seeing these very primal, scary things play out, but from a safe place. That's kind of the best way I can describe it. It is weird to be asked about, because you're like, yeah, how can I find these, 20-somethings being slaughtering like so fun, so enjoyable? Like, what is wrong with me? But it is just such a blast. It's an art. It's an art. I love horror because it's a way of exploring fears and deeper, sometimes scary things through metaphor. I think that's my favorite thing about it, at least horror at its best. But there's also this other side of horror that I've also come to really love. I don't think me of 10 years ago would have believed that I would be watching some of like the low budget B-movie schlock, but I think horror is just fun. It's so creative. The practical effects are just a blast. There's just something so charming about the tropes. Any movie that starts off with 20-somethings driving in a car and partying and like going out to like some desolate area for vacation, I am so locked in. It's been done 100 times, 100 different ways, but I just love the comfort that comes with these tropes and these things. And it can be unexpected yet familiar at the same time. And I think that's why I really love the genre, because it's always surprising me. It's funny because I think in a lot of ways horror can be really comforting. I know it is for me, and I know it is for so many people.